At 3 in the morning on a snowy Kyiv street in winter 2013, an ATM dispensed thousands of dollars to no one. A man with a duffel bag swept the cash off the pavement and vanished. No card, no alarm, no security response. Across 30 countries, simultaneous wire transfers silently moved millions through interbank payment systems into offshore accounts. When the banks reconciled their ledgers, every balance was perfect. No customer was robbed, no vault was breached. The computers insisted nothing had happened. It was, by total dollar value, the largest bank heist in history. $1 billion penetrated across 100 banks, without a single alarm. This is File 14, the Darkroom Heist. For 100 years, bank robbers targeted the vault. For 30 years, cybercriminals targeted the encryption surrounding the vault. The architects of the Carbanak heist realized both approaches were too difficult. The bank's perimeter is too well defended, the vault is too well alarmed. Modern banking infrastructure is built to resist exactly the attacks that traditional thieves know how to mount. So they took a different approach. They decided not to fight the bank's security at all. They decided to simply become the bank. The infiltration began with a single email. The Carbanak operators sent highly targeted spear-phishing emails to mid-level employees at over 100 different financial institutions across 30 countries. Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Germany, the United States, Japan. Each email looked like an internal communication from the recipient's own HR department. Each carried a Word attachment with an embedded macro. It only took one tired clerk, somewhere in the global network, clicking that attachment for the operation to begin. The macro inside the attachment was a Microsoft Word exploit chain that combined 3 separate vulnerabilities. The first allowed arbitrary code execution from inside a document preview. The second escalated that code by chaining a Microsoft Office RTF parsing vulnerability that had been disclosed years earlier. The third installed a persistent backdoor that survived reboots, antivirus scans, and routine system updates. Each vulnerability had been disclosed publicly years earlier. Each one had a vendor patch available. None of those patches had been applied to the targeted clerks' workstations. Because mid-tier banks across Eastern Europe were running on 3-year-old enterprise images, and the patch deployment lag was structurally enormous. The operators were not using zero-day exploits, they were using known-day exploits. Vulnerabilities that had been cataloged, fixed, and ignored. The most expensive cyber defense budgets in the world cannot defend an institution that does not install the patches that vendors ship for free. Once the payload landed, the operators did not immediately move money. If they moved too fast, the bank's anomaly detection algorithms would freeze every transaction, and the entire intrusion would be exposed. Instead, they began 3 weeks of patient reconnaissance. They mapped the bank's intranet from the inside. They identified every domain controller, every admin account, every internal application server. Their network footprint stayed below 0.2% of total traffic, statistically indistinguishable from background noise. The bank's IT staff, watching their monitoring consoles every day, saw nothing. And then the operators initiated the most patient phase of the heist. They started watching. For 4 months, the Carbanak operators sat perfectly still in the dark. They used Carbanak to hijack the webcams of every bank workstation they had compromised. The activity indicator lights on those cameras stayed dark, but the lenses kept recording. They captured screenshots of every monitor at sub-second intervals. They logged every keystroke of every clerk in compliance, in operations, in the wire transfer department. They were not stealing data, they were learning a craft. Hour by hour, day by day, week by week, the operators studied exactly how the banks moved money. They learned the proprietary accounting software. They documented every menu, every keyboard shortcut, every approval workflow. They identified the specific clerks who had authority over the largest transactions. They captured the override codes those clerks typed. They watched until they could replicate the bank's daily operational rhythm exactly. The bank employees were unwittingly teaching the Carbanak operators how to rob them. After 4 months, the operators had built behavioral twins of 15 specific bank employees across the global network. They had stolen credentials. They had observed login windows. They had documented end-of-day checkout times. Inside the bank's own systems, the operators could now log in as those employees, perform the same actions at roughly the same times of day, and look indistinguishable from the legitimate clerks. The behavioral twin profiles were unsettling in their detail. Each profile included the clerk's average typing speed in keystrokes per minute, the order in which she opened her morning applications, her habit of pausing twice for coffee between 9 and 11 a.m., the specific times she submitted batch transfers, and the cadence of her end-of-day reconciliation. One operator's notebook recovered later listed the clerk's personal habits like a ballet choreography. When each one stretched at her desk, when she answered her phone, when she stepped away to the bathroom. The operators had become method actors. The performance was the heist. The patient observation phase cost the Carbanak Group nothing in operational risk. It cost them only time. And then, one quiet afternoon, the lead operator typed a single short instruction into an encrypted chat window. And the heist became live. The Carbanak operators did not steal money from customer accounts. That would have triggered a balance discrepancy. The customer would have logged in the next morning, seen a $9,000 withdrawal they did not authorize, and called the bank. The bank's fraud department would have identified the unauthorized transfer. The chain would have unraveled in hours. Instead, the operators invented money. They logged in as a real bank clerk at a normal time of day from inside the bank's network. They used the proprietary accounting interface they had spent 4 months learning. They opened a customer's account record. They changed the balance directly in the database. $1,000 became $10,000. The change was logged with a timestamp that matched the clerk's normal working hours. The audit trail looked identical to an ordinary credit transaction. Then they wired the difference, $9,000, to a shell company offshore. The wire was small enough to slip under the bank's anomaly detection threshold. Then, the same night, before the customer ever logged in, they rolled the balance back. $10,000 became $1,000 again. The customer's records were untouched. The bank's reconciliation algorithm balanced perfectly the next morning. Every dollar that had ever existed in the bank still existed. The bank had no idea any money was missing because, technically, no customer had been robbed. The operators had effectively printed $9,000 out of thin air, transferred it overseas, and erased every trace of its creation in under 3 minutes. Then they did it again, across 30 countries, across hundreds of accounts, each operation small enough to be invisible. The aggregate, after 18 months of patient inflate exfiltrate restore cycles, exceeded $1 billion. And every now and then, when they wanted physical cash, they remotely instructed specific bank ATMs to dispense bundles at specific times into the hands of money mules waiting on snowy street corners. The bank's monitoring console saw the dispense logged as a routine maintenance test. By the time investigators reconstructed the pattern many months later, the cash had already passed through 48 cities and laundered into legitimate property holdings, cryptocurrency wallets, luxury vehicles, and registered shell companies across 6 jurisdictions. The trail had cooled to nothing. The ledger lies perfectly. The thread that unraveled Carbanak was an unusual ATM dispensation pattern, flagged by a single Russian bank in late 2014. The bank called in Kaspersky Labs' global research and analysis team. the lead Kaspersky analyst spent 3 days reverse engineering the malware sample on the compromised workstation. He found the keystroke logger, the screen grabber, the webcam hijack module. He found the specific component that injected SQL queries directly into bank database systems. He found the ATM dispense module. He found the Swift trigger module. And he realized he was not looking at a one-off attack on a single bank. He was looking at a complete cyber heist toolkit, professionally engineered, designed for portability across many different banks. His team ran the Carbanak malware signature against their database of samples, submitted by financial sector clients across the world. The query returned hundreds of hits. Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the United States, Japan, China. Over 100 banks across 30 countries had been quietly infected by the same operation. The aggregate exfiltration, when Kaspersky's analysts reconciled the numbers with each affected institution, exceeded $1 billion. It was, by total dollar value, the largest bank heist in human history. Interpol coordinated a multi-agency response. 3 years later, in March 2018, Spanish National Police arrested a man in Alicante, alleged to be the operational leader of the Carbanak and Cobalt malware groups. His apartment was full of laptops. His monitors were still glowing when the officers walked in. The investigators recovered accumulated transfer logs going back 3 years. Accumulated transfer logs going back 3 years. And a detailed operational manual written in Russian that read more like a corporate training document than a criminal blueprint. It contained chapters on social engineering, on database schema reverse engineering, on managing the Money Mule network across 48 cities. It even contained a section on operational security for the operators themselves. What to do if a bank's incident response team finally noticed something. How to dispose of compromised infrastructure within 7 minutes of detection. How to maintain plausible deniability if a national police agency knocked on the door. The arrested man was charged with the largest cyber financial crime in European history. The trial moved slowly. The Spanish judicial proceedings continued. Outcomes for individual co-conspirators have remained largely sealed. The case became a quiet legal footnote rather than the public spectacle the arrest had promised, and disappeared from public view within 72 hours of his release. But the playbook was already public. Kaspersky's analysis paper had already been published. The forensic indicators were in every major security vendor's threat intelligence feed. Every cybercrime group on Earth could now read the recipe. And every successor since has inherited the same patient, observation-based principle, though each adapted its own technical means. In 2016, a successor group known as Cobalt Group adopted the Carbanak organizational pattern and conducted a second wave of bank intrusions across Eastern and Western Europe. In February 2016, North Korean state-sponsored operators known as Lazarus Group applied the same patient observation logic against an entirely different surface, the Swift Alliance Access workstation inside Bangladesh Central Bank, and attempted to transfer $951 million to accounts in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. The technical execution was distinct from Carbanak. The principle was identical. Watch the institution until you understand it better than it understands itself. The patient observation principle had become the dominant cybercriminal pattern of the late 2010s. The bank had taught the burglar, and the burglar had now taught everyone. Carbanak proved a new theorem of cybercrime. The most dangerous attackers in the world are no longer brute-forcing firewalls or exploiting zero-day kernel bugs. They are patient, they are observant. They sit perfectly still in the dark and watch the inside of the institution they intend to rob, until they understand it better than the institution understands itself. The most expensive cyber defense in the world cannot defend against an attacker. whose entire methodology is to look exactly like a normal employee doing a normal job at a normal time of day. The ultimate bank robbery is not blowing the safe. It is watching the administrative process so closely and mimicking it so perfectly that the bank simply robs itself. Modern enterprises are not just banks. Hospitals run on networked workstations with webcams. Law firms run on network document management systems with keystroke loggable terminals. Energy utilities run on networked control consoles. Universities, transit systems, government agencies, every one of them has a daily operational rhythm that can be learned by a patient observer with a foothold inside the network. In February 2016, the patient observation principle was inherited by a state actor, though applied through entirely different technical means. North Korean operators of the Lazarus Group penetrated the network of Bangladesh Central Bank and moved laterally for months to reach the workstation that hosted the bank's Swift Alliance access software. They deployed bespoke malware, EveDiag.exe and EveAtses.exe, designed to tamper with Swift message validation and suppress the printer confirmations. They stole the operator credentials. On February 5, 2016, during the routine outbound payment window, the operators issued 35 fraudulent Swift transfer instructions. They attempted to move $951 million from Bangladesh Bank's correspondent account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The Federal Reserve forwarded transfers totaling $81 million. Before Deutsche Bank, acting as correspondent on one of the cables, flagged a misspelled payee name, Foundation, in place of Foundation, and queried Bangladesh Bank for confirmation the remaining cables were frozen. The $81 million was already moving through Philippine Casino Bank laundering pipelines. Most of it has never been recovered. Carbanak was a behavioral template. Lazarus rewrote it for Swift. Same logic, different surface, state-sponsored. And the playbook has been public since 2015. The session is logged. The connection is closed. The files remain open. The webcam at the top of the monitor in your office right now, the green light is dark. That doesn't mean the lens isn't recording. Which leaves us with the closing question of File 14. Who is watching your daily routine right now? Patient enough to wait 4 months, observant enough to learn every keystroke, and operationally trained enough to log in as you tomorrow morning while you're still drinking your first coffee.